The Nausicaan excavation team stared slack-jawed and incredulous as ancient steel doors groaned open, revealing rows of frosted cryopods, and one battered pod at the center began to hiss and unseal with a whir. "Impossible," gasped Fenris, the hulking Nausicaan captain, his eyes widening and clawed hands tightening around his plasma rifle. No beings could survive so long in cryo-sleep. His science officer, a spindly orange alien named Yaxar, checked his scanner again in disbelief. "Captain, I'm definitely detecting a life sign from inside that central pod, a human life sign." He looked up. Probes indicate these ruins date back thousands of cycles from before the fall of the human empire. If a human really is alive in there after all this time. The Nausicaans glanced at each other nervously, mandibles and tails twitching. Aged human tech was valuable enough as a relic, but a living, breathing human from the lost empire, with their secrets, their priceless knowledge. Such a prize could make the Nausicaans unstoppable, if they dared to seize it. "We must report this discovery to the Galactic Council immediately," urged Yaxar. "No." Fenris narrowed his yellow eyes. "The Council will take the human for themselves. This is our glory alone." He turned to his strike team, armed to the teeth with energy spears and pulse blasters. "No one else can know until we have secured the human, set up a perimeter and—" Alarms blared. A robotic voice boomed from the walls. "Unauthorized xenoforms detected, initiating defense protocols." Turrets unfolded from the ceiling, humming with power. Fenris roared and fired his rifle at the nearest one, but the blast splashed harmlessly off its energy shield. His men launched a barrage of shots as well, to no effect. The turrets thrummed and glowed, locking onto targets. "Yaxar, shut those machines down," Fenris bellowed, diving for cover. "I can't, sir. This human tech, it's beyond me." As the cryopod finished opening with a pneumatic hiss, and a silhouette sat up from inside, one fact became terribly clear to Fenris. They had all underestimated the humans, even centuries after their fall. And that mistake might now cost the Nausicaans everything. Meanwhile, light years away, Douglas Brown entered the Galactic Council chamber with a grim expression, knowing he carried the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. Meanwhile, light years away, Douglas Brown entered the Galactic Council chamber with a grim expression, knowing he carried the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. The council members stared down at him, expectant. Douglas took a deep breath. "I accept this mission. For the sake of the galaxy, that Praetorian cannot fall into the wrong hands." Hours later, Douglas's stealth shuttle dropped out of hyperspace in orbit of Zephyrus 6. He checked his HUD overlay, seeing the expedition's base camp highlighted on the desolate surface below. His lips pressed into a line as he spied the hulking form of Captain Fenris, flanked by scientists and soldiers in high-tech armor, making their way toward the cryo chamber ruins. Douglas expertly guided his shuttle to a sheltered landing spot, a click from the Nausicaan camp. He double-checked his plasma carbine and the micro-EMP charges on his belt, special human-designed weapons and stealth tech entrusted to him by the Council. As he crept closer to the ruins, keeping to the shadows, Douglas tuned into the Nausicaans' comms. He overheard Fenris discussing a way they'd found to hack the ancient human AI's defenses, but it would take their tech specialists many hours of uninterrupted system access. Circling wide around the camp, Douglas planted his micro-EMPs near their shield generators and computer mainframes. He took cover behind a rocky outcropping and triggered the charges. The night lit up with the crackling burst of overloaded electronics and panicked shouts of Nausicaans. In the chaos, Douglas sprinted for the cryo chamber entrance, darting inside while the aliens rushed to contain the damage. His eyes narrowed as he took in the twisting metal corridors of the ancient facility, bathed in ominous red light. Douglas knew the great human scientists of the past had lined this place with clever traps. Humanity never did like to make things easy. He set off at a quick pace, carbine up and ready. A pressure plate click underfoot was his only warning before a barrage of metal darts whipped out from the walls. Douglas hit the deck and rolled, feeling them slice the air above him. He popped up into a crouch and continued forward, senses on high alert. A chill ran up his spine as he neared the central cryo chamber. The ancient human script lining the walls spoke of the Praetorian's brilliance, a scientist who, if revived by the wrong beings, could unleash unimaginable horrors on the galaxy. Douglas froze as his scanner pinged a sudden influx of movement signatures. The Nausicans had discovered his sabotage and were converging on the complex en masse, hungry for blood. Douglas dashed to the cryopod, hacking the control panel with an infiltrator spike he pulled from his tactical belt. The Council tech worked like a charm. The ancient AI chimed in recognition of his human DNA. Cryo fluid vented from the pod in billowing mist. Douglas stacked metal crates into a makeshift barricade, plasma carbine trained on the only entrance. Muffled shouts and blaster fire echoed down the hall. Douglas gritted his teeth. The Nausicans had breached the complex. A searing bolt slammed into his cover. Douglas popped up, dropping a charging lizard with a clean headshot. He ducked back as answering shots scorched the air. The doors burst inward. Captain Fenris stormed in, flanked by his elite guard. They fanned out, energy spears crackling. Douglas went full auto, spraying the attackers and forcing them behind pillars. Fenris snarled orders to his men. A sudden hiss from the cryopod. Douglas risked a glance back. The lid yawned open, a muscular silhouette rising from within. The Praetorian stood tall, his close-cropped silver hair still damp, his piercing blue eyes taking in the chaos. Douglas tossed him a fallen guard's pulsar. The Praetorian caught it, grinning. They moved in sync, Douglas laying down suppressing fire as the Praetorian flanked wide. Nausicans fell in sprays of blood. The humans were a blur of precise shots and brutal melee. Fenris and his 3 remaining guards pressed forward. The Praetorian kicked a spear from a guard's grip, snapping the Nausicans' neck. Douglas dropped another with a carbine burst. Fenris lunged, pinning the Praetorian to the wall. "You're coming with us, human." Fenris's spear ripped from his hands, clattering away. The guards' weapons did the same, leaving them dumbstruck. Douglas glanced at the Praetorian in awe. His companion just shrugged. "Surprises me, too." Fenris staggered back, his guards stunned and unarmed. Douglas and the Praetorian moved as one, snatching up weapons, grabbing the alien's comms and scanning gear. They sprinted for the exit. Douglas slapped charges on the entrance arch and hit the detonator. The tunnel mouth collapsed in a rush of stone and metal, sealing the Nausicans inside. The humans charged out across the barren plain, angling for Douglas's hidden shuttle. Angry Nausicaan voices burst to life on the stolen comms, calling for backup. The Praetorian glanced over, a hint of a smirk on his lips. "So what's the plan now, fearless rescuer?" Douglas grinned back. "I'm sure the Council will be thrilled to meet you." A plasma bolt sizzled past his head. Nausicaan skimmers crested a ridge behind them, cannons blazing. Douglas cursed. The Praetorian just laughed. They dove for the dubious cover of the boulder-strewn valley ahead, a storm of enemy fire whipping at their heels. The dense alien jungle shook with thunderous booms as the ancient ruins caved in on themselves, a billowing cloud of dust chasing the fleeing humans. Douglas sprinted through the thick undergrowth, the mysterious Praetorian keeping pace at his side. Low-hanging vines whipped at their faces as they ran. "I'm Alaric, by the way," the Praetorian said between breaths, ducking under a gnarled branch. "Guess I should introduce myself since you went to all this trouble." Douglas glanced over, still trying to process the fact that he was talking to a living relic of humanity's golden age. "Douglas, you can call me Doug, though trouble is an understatement." Alaric smirked as he vaulted over a fallen log. "I bet. Last thing I remember is going into the freezer as part of the Templar Knight's big contingency plan. An elite unit, best of the best. Our job was to protect Earth from anything that came knocking." Alaric's eyes glazed over with memory. "When things started looking grim for the war, I volunteered to go on ice, a backup copy of human knowledge and skill in case the worst happened." Douglas nodded. He'd heard the stories of how close humanity had come to annihilation. They'd pulled through, but the Terran Empire had crumbled in the aftermath, reduced to fractured colonies. Up ahead, Douglas spied the distinct silhouette of his stealth shuttle through the dense foliage. "We're almost there. My ship's not far." Alaric slid in beside Douglas, eyes hard. "I'll take the two on the left." The Praetorian exploded from cover, moving faster than Douglas thought possible. He slammed into the first Nausicaan, grabbing the alien spear arm and wrenching it back with a sickening crack. Douglas was only a split second behind, carbine barking. His first burst took a Nausicaan in the chest, sending him sprawling. Douglas dove forward, narrowly evading an answering shot. Douglas pressed his advantage, peppering the remaining scouts with suppressing fire. One of his bolts found a gap in a Nausicaan's armor, dropping it with a gurgling cry. Alaric sprang at the final alien, feinting a punch, then sweeping its legs. The Nausicaan hit the ground hard. Alaric's boot slammed down on its temple, and it went still. Douglas jogged over, impressed. "Those are some moves. They don't teach that at the academy these days." Alaric flashed a grin. Benefits of a classical education. Together they raced the final stretch to Douglas's shuttle. The sleek craft shimmered into view as Douglas deactivated its cloaking field. He hit the ramp controls and sprinted aboard, Alaric on his heels. Douglas threw himself into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the console. The shuttle shuddered as its engines roared to life. A proximity alert blared. Douglas jerked his head up to see a Nausicaan fighter, wings streaking into view, cannons flashing. Damn it, they must have tracked... His console pinged with an urgent transmission from the Council. A blue-skinned Vorian in ornate robes appeared on the display. "Agent Brown, we have a situation," the Vorian said, his voice strained. "The Nausicaans have launched an assault fleet. They're heading for Thespis Prime." Ice settled in Douglas's gut. Thespis was the heart of Council space. If it fell... He met Alaric's gaze. The Praetorian's jaw clenched, reading Douglas's expression. Douglas's shuttle burst from warp speed, the embattled blue-green orb of Thespis Prime looming in the viewscreen. Alaric leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Looks like we're late to the party." Swarms of Nausicaan attack craft darted around the Council's beleaguered defense fleet, pulse cannons flashing. A Vorian cruiser exploded under the onslaught, debris pinwheeling into the void. Douglas gunned the throttle, weaving through the chaos. "Let's hope they saved some dance partners for us." Their shuttle streaked into Thespis' atmosphere, warning klaxons blaring as a Nausicaan fighter wing dropped in pursuit. Plasma bolts sizzled past the cockpit. Douglas jinked hard, popping countermeasures. The shuttle shuddered as a near miss scorched its shields. Looming ahead was the sprawling complex of the Council's Planetary Defense Command. Its towering ion cannons belched fire into the sky, beating back the encroaching Nausicaan ships. Douglas aimed for the base's primary hangar, punching the shuttle into a corkscrew dive. The bay's force field parted just long enough for them to careen through, enemy shots peppering their aft shields. The shuttle slammed to the deck, hydraulics groaning. Douglas and Alaric leapt out, sprinting past gawking technicians and scrambling flight crews. A familiar figure awaited them at the hangar's far end, Zarax, the Council's spymaster. His ornate robes were scorched and tattered, a pulse rifle clutched in his long-fingered hands. A motley assortment of soldiers stood at crisp attention behind him, a towering Vorian in heavy armor, a lithe Zathian with twin energy blades, an Elaxian sniper with a bandolier of glowing ammo. The best of the Council's elite forces, assembled for a crucial mission. "Commander Brown, Praetorian Alaric, you made good time," Zarax said, his voice strained. "I only wish it were under better circumstances." Douglas nodded grimly. "What's our status? The Nausicaans are hitting harder than we expected." Zarax gestured to a flickering holomap floating above a portable projector. "They've unveiled a new weapon, unlike anything we've seen." The display zoomed in on the massive Nausicaan flagship at the heart of their fleet. A pulsing, spire-like structure rose from its hull, crackling with eldritch energy. Long-range scans indicate it's an enormously powerful particle cannon, capable of reducing an entire city to molten slag. Alaric frowned, studying the readouts. What's its power source? Something that potent would require... Nexium crystals, Zarax finished. A rare mineral the Nausicans seem to have found in abundance on Zephyrus 6. Alaric's brow knitted. I encountered Nexium in my time. Incredibly unstable, difficult to work with, but potentially devastating if harnessed properly. He looked up, meeting Zarax's gaze. During the war, I developed a device to neutralize Nexium, to dampen its erratic energy states, but it was lost when I went into cryo sleep. Douglas shifted his rifle. I'm guessing that's where we come in, infiltrate that flagship, shut down the cannon? Zarax nodded, and if possible retrieve a Nexium sample for Alaric to analyze. He gestured to the waiting soldiers. This is Sigma Team, the best we have. They'll follow your lead. Douglas turned to Alaric. Feel up for another dance? As the strike team marched toward the hangar's Black Ops shuttle, Alaric pulled Douglas aside. He pressed a small crystalline device into the commander's palm. I want you to hold on to this, Alaric said, his voice low. It's a prototype Nexium neutralizer I built centuries ago, never fully tested. His ice chip eyes bored into Douglas. If things go sideways over there, it might be our only option, but use it only if there's no other choice. The effects could be unpredictable. Douglas closed his fingers around the device, feeling its thrumming warmth. He met Alaric's gaze and nodded. Then together, the two humans boarded the waiting shuttle, the fate of worlds resting squarely on their shoulders. The cloaked dropship hurtled through the chaos of the orbital battle, its reflective hull rendering it all but invisible to the enemy's sensors. In the cramped hold, Douglas and Alaric crouched shoulder to shoulder with Sigma Team, checking weapons and gear one final time. The ship shuddered as it slipped through the flagship's shields, docking clamps locking onto the behemoth's armored hull with a metallic clunk. Douglas raised a fist, signaling the team to ready up. Stick to the plan, he said, meeting each soldier's gaze. We get in, we get it done, we get out, no heroics, understood? A chorus of nods and grunts. Alaric flashed a confident grin, twirling a vicious-looking combat knife. Let's hunt, Commander. The dropship's hatch hissed open, revealing a dimly lit maintenance corridor. Douglas and Alaric moved out first, carbines up and scanning. Sigma 2, you're up, give 'em hell. The Vorian nodded, signaling his squad forward. They vanished into the shadows, off to sow chaos in the enemy's backlines. Douglas, Alaric, and the rest of Sigma 1 pressed on, angling for the energy cannon's fire control center. Booted feet pounded on metal grating. Douglas held up a fist, halting the team. Ahead, the guttural snarls of Nausicaan voices drifted from an open bulkhead. Douglas flashed quick hand signs. Alaric nodded, shifting his grip on his rifle. As one, the humans burst into the chamber, weapons roaring. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the air, flash-boiling droplets of blood. Douglas dropped two Nausicans with tight shots, their bodies pitching back in sprays of viscera. Alaric moved like a ghost, appearing behind a snarling alien and snapping its neck with a vicious twist. His carbine barked, stitching a line of holes up another Nausicaan's torso. The Alaxian sniper, perched on a catwalk above, rained precise shots into the fray, downing target after target. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The Nausicaans lay strewn about the room, steam rising from neat holes burned in their armor. Douglas reloaded with practiced movements, alien blood dripping from his fatigues. Alaric wiped his knife clean, a feral gleam in his eye. They pushed forward, pace quickening. The energy cannon's thrum grew louder with each step, a rising whine setting teeth on edge. Another corner, another knot of enemies. Douglas took a hit to the shoulder, his armor drinking most of the plasma bolt's fury. He hissed in pain, stumbling back. Alaric was there in an instant, slamming a fresh magazine into his carbine and letting rip a long burst. Nausicaans crumpled like rag dolls. The Praetorian ripped a medipack from his belt, roughly yanking the bolt free and slapping a compression bandage over the wound. He jammed a stimulant injector into Douglas's neck. the cocktail of combat drugs chasing away the pain. On your feet, soldier. We're not done yet. Douglas forced himself back up, scooping his fallen weapon. The door to the fire control room loomed ahead, a pair of hulking guards rising to meet them with crackling power glaives. Alaric stepped forward, a shimmering distortion forming around him. The Nausicans' glaives bounced off the shimmering air, their eyes going wide. Douglas now. The commander didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted forward, diving into a baseball slide between the guard's legs. His carbine snarled twice, and the Nausicans dropped like stones. Douglas slapped a breaching charge on the blast door, scrambling clear. The shaped charge blew inward with a crack of thunder, the shockwave bowling over the Nausicans inside. Alaric and the others poured in, making short work of the dazed defenders. Douglas sprinted to the control console, fingers flying over the alien interface. Alaric took up position at the door, rifle snapping at targets only he could see. The Alaxian and Zathian flanked him, energy blades thrumming and sniper rifle barking. Douglas's world narrowed to the scrolling lines of code, his hands a blur. Sweat stung his eyes, almost there. A hated voice crackled from the room's view screen. Douglas's head snapped up, his blood running cold. Captain Fenris stared back at him, a cruel smile splitting his scarred face. And kneeling in front of him, bound and bloodied, was the rest of Sigma Team. Douglas froze, fingers hovering over the console. He shot a desperate glance at Alaric. The Praetorian met his gaze, something dangerous sparking in those ice-chip eyes. He gave a small nod. In a blur of motion, Alaric slammed his hand against the wall. Tendrils of crackling energy raced out from his fingers, dancing over the ship's systems. Lights flickered wildly. Alarm klaxons blared. Fenris jerked back in surprise, the gun wavering from the Vorian's temple. It was all the opening Sigma-2 needed. The captive soldiers burst into motion, their bonds snapping like twine. They fell on their shocked captors in a whirlwind of blows, Fenris's pistol skittering away across the deck. The view screen went dark in a squeal of static. Douglas bared his teeth in a fierce grin, slamming the final key. The energy cannon's rising thrums sputtered and died. Package secure. Alaric held up the Nexium crystal, its facets shimmering with eldritch light. Time to move. They fell back the way they had come, a fighting retreat through smoke and blood. Bulkheads shuddered as secondary explosions tore through the wounded flagship. The strike team burst into the dropship, Douglas and Alaric laying down blistering cover fire from the ramp. Plasma bolts sizzled past, the Nausicans in hot pursuit. Through the viewports, the massive Nausican ship lurched drunkenly, great gouts of flame erupting from rents in its hull. And then, in a blinding flash of light, its reactor went critical. The shockwave slammed into the dropship, sending it tumbling end over end. Douglas clung to the restraints, gritting his teeth as the G-forces tried to crush him into his seat. And then silence. The dropship's engines evened out, the blue-green curve of Thespis Prime rising to fill the viewports. Douglas sagged back, his hands shaking as the adrenaline drained away. He glanced over at Alaric, the Praetorian's face split by a weary grin. Looks like we live to fight another day. The dropship touched down on Thespis Prime's sprawling spaceport, the acrid stench of battle still lingering in the air. Douglas and Alaric disembarked, their faces etched with exhaustion and grim satisfaction. Zarax greeted them on the tarmac, his robe still singed from the orbital bombardment. You've done well, both of you. The Council is in your debt. Alaric hefted the containment case holding the Nexium sample. This is what they were after. I need to analyze it immediately. In the Council's gleaming research facility, Alaric hunched over a console, fingers flying over the controls. The Nexium crystal hovered in a stabilization field, pulsing with seething energy. Douglas watched, brow furrowed. What are you seeing? Alaric shook his head, eyes never leaving the readouts. The potential power output is immense, far beyond anything I've seen. The Nausicans must have found a way to stabilize it. He looked up, meeting Douglas's gaze. That cannon was just the beginning. With this technology, they could create weapons that make it look like a child's toy. Douglas's jaw clenched. Then we need to find their stockpile, destroy it before they can use it against us. In the Council's war room, Zarax brought up a star map, zooming in on a dense asteroid field. Our intel teams have located a hidden Nausicaan outpost here, in the Orcs system. We believe this is where they're refining the Nexium. Douglas leaned forward, studying the hologram. What kind of defenses are we looking at? Significant, Zarax replied. Sensor nets, minefields, garrison troops. A frontal assault would be costly. Alaric crossed his arms. Then we go in quiet, a small team, surgical strike. Zarax nodded. I can provide you with our best operatives, state-of-the-art stealth tech, specialized equipment. Douglas met Alaric's gaze. Looks like we're back in the fight. As they geared up in the armory, Douglas's wristcom chimed with an incoming message. His brow furrowed as he read the sender's ID. Marcus, his brother, missing for years on a deep space mission. Douglas's heart raced as he opened the message, a holographic image of Marcus flickering to life. His brother looked haggard, his eyes haunted. Doug, if you're getting this, I don't have much time. Marcus glanced over his shoulder as if fearing pursuit. I found something out here, in the Orcs system, an artifact, ancient beyond reckoning. It's connected to the Nexium somehow, to a power that should never be unleashed. The image flickered, static, distorting Marcus's next words. Can't let them find it. Destroy the Nexium, the outpost, everything. Don't let it fall into the wrong... The message cut out, leaving Douglas staring at empty air. He clenched his fist, warring emotions playing across his face. Alaric stepped up beside him, concern in his eyes. Douglas, what is it? As they boarded the stealth ship, Douglas cast one last look at the stars, his brother's warning echoing in his mind. Whatever secrets the Orcs system held, he would face them head-on. For the Council, for the galaxy. And for Marcus. Douglas gripped the controls of his stealth ship, knuckles white as he wove through the tumbling asteroids. Alaric and the strike team followed close behind, their sleek craft darting and juking to avoid collisions. The hidden Nausicaan outpost loomed ahead, a dark blot against the starscape. Douglas narrowed his eyes, fingers tightening on the trigger. Almost there. Incoming! Alaric's voice crackled over the comm. Nausicaan fighters, 6 o'clock. A dozen alien ships screamed out from behind a massive asteroid, cannons blazing. Douglas wrenched his ship into a barrel roll, barely evading a barrage of plasma. His shield indicator flashed red, alarms wailing. The human ships scattered, engaging the enemy in a vicious dogfight among the tumbling rocks. Douglas jinked and snap-rolled, his cannons spitting blue fire. A Nausicaan fighter exploded, peppering his shields with shrapnel. Stay on mission, Alaric called, his own guns flaring. Push through to the outpost. Douglas gritted his teeth, laying down a blistering barrage of covering fire. The Nausicaans pressed the attack, trying to cut the humans off from their target. Tracer rounds and energy blasts crisscrossed the void, ships wheeling and diving in a deadly ballet. Douglas vaped another fighter, then wrenched into a gut-churning corkscrew to evade a proton torpedo. As he leveled out, a flicker of movement caught his eye. An unmarked ship, small and fast, dodging through the asteroids on the periphery of the battle. A ship he recognized all too well. Marcus! The whisper slipped out before he could stop it. Alaric's voice crackled in his ear. Douglas, stay in formation, we have to... He clicked off his comm, already weaving through the asteroids in pursuit of the ghost from his past. His brother's ship danced ahead of him, always just out of reach. Douglas's jaw clenched. He pushed his throttle to the red line, G-forces crushing him into his seat. Asteroids flashed past in a blur, near misses setting off proximity alarms. With a teeth-rattling thud, his ship slammed into the docking clamps on his brother's vessel. Cutting thrust, Douglas snatched up his carbine and slapped the airlock release. The ship was dark, emergency lights flickering. Douglas advanced cautiously, weapon up and scanning. Blast scoring marred the walls, shattered bulkheads sparking and flickering. He swallowed hard, signs of a vicious battle. A flicker of light caught his eye. A datapad, still powered on, wedged into a corner. He snatched it up, fingers flying over the controls. Words scrolled across the screen, stolen fragments of a desperate journal. The Nexus Codex, the key to Nexium's power, have to find it before they do. An ancient alien artifact, origins unknown, could make the Nausicans unstoppable. The Codex calls to me, Doug. I think it's on Zelos Prime. If I don't make it... The entry ended in a smear of blood. Douglas clutched the datapad, eyes squeezing shut. A ragged breath shuddered in his chest. "I'll find you, Marcus," he whispered. "I swear it, and I'll make them pay." Explosions suddenly lit the void, shockwaves slamming into the ship. Douglas rushed to the viewport, eyes widening. The outpost was a storm of light and fury, Alaric's team fighting their way back to their ships. Nausicaan reinforcements poured from launch bays, eager for blood. Douglas prepared to detach and fly to their aid, then froze. A massive energy surge burst from the base's core, a blinding flare of light. Consoles across Marcus's ship overloaded, popping and sparking. On the strike team's ships, running lights went dark. Engines sputtered and died, weapons fell silent. The EMP had knocked out all systems, leaving them drifting and helpless. The Nausicans closed in for the kill, fangs bared, but one ship still burned with light and fury, Alaric's. The Praetorian stood on the outer hull, eyes flaring with eldritch power. Ribbons of energy swirled and danced around him, a barely contained tempest. Douglas watched, stricken as Alaric unleashed that storm. Raw power lashed out, engulfing the outpost in a maelstrom of destruction. Ships burned, bulkheads crumpled, launch bays collapsed in on themselves. The outpost shattered like glass, a billion shards tumbling into the void. Alaric's energy shell collapsed, the Praetorian slumping to his knees. Smoke rose from his combat suit, his face a mask of pain. Douglas pounded the airlock release, rocketing toward his fallen friend. He reached him just as the last of the explosions faded, the outpost now nothing more than an expanding cloud of debris. Alaric's eyes fluttered open as Douglas gripped his arm. The Praetorian managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" he croaked. For now, at least. But as Douglas helped his wounded friend back to the ship, he knew their battle was just beginning. The Nexus Codex was still out there, and he would find it, no matter the cost. Douglas sagged against the bulkhead of the escape pod. The Nexus Codex clutched tight to his chest as Xyloth piloted them clear of the collapsing station. Grief and exhaustion etched deep lines into his face. He squeezed his eyes shut, Alaric's final moments replaying in his mind. The Praetorian's fierce grin as he unleashed his power, the terrible light consuming his body. And then, nothing but swirling dust and echoes. "He saved us all," Xyloth said softly, the Axari's long fingers dancing over the controls. Alaric was a hero until the end. Douglas nodded, not trusting himself to speak past the lump in his throat. The journey back to Thespis Prime passed in a blur. Douglas barely registered the council guards ushering him into the grand chamber, barely felt the weight of the codex in his hands as he placed it on the podium before the assembled leaders. His voice sounded distant to his own ears as he recounted the events on the Nausicaan outpost, the revelation of the Nexus Codex's existence. High Councillor Valen leaned forward, his silver eyes intent. "You say this codex is the key to the Nexium crystals, that it could grant someone immense power?" "Yes," Douglas's voice hardened. "Power that the Nausicans were close to claiming for themselves. Power that cost Alaric his life to keep out of their hands." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "Then there is not a moment to lose," Valen said. "Commander Brown, you must find this codex before our enemies do. The fate of the galaxy may depend on it." In the end, he chose two. Xyloth, the brilliant Axari hacker, who'd proven herself in the Nausicaan outpost, and Grath, a grizzled Karnathi warrior with a lifetime of battle experience etched into his craggy features. They gathered in the council's armory, gearing up in silence. Douglas checked the charge on his plasma carbine, the weapon an extension of his own body. Xyloth looked up from her holodisplay, eyes glinting. "I've analyzed the data from your brother's ship. There's a reference to a set of coordinates in the outer reaches, an abandoned space station that predates any known civilization." "That must be where the Codex is hidden," Douglas said. "Chart a course. We're going hunting." The station loomed out of the void like a great steel carcass, its hull pitted and scarred by eons of isolation. Douglas guided their shuttle into a yawning hangar bay, ancient atmospherics groaning to life. The team moved out, weapons up and scanning. The station's corridors were choked with debris and shadows, the only light the eerie glow of ancient power conduits. Grath took point, his massive battle axe held loose and ready. "Eyes sharp," he rumbled. "No telling what's waiting for us in here." They pushed deeper into the station, following the twisting path laid out in Marcus's data. Booby traps and ancient sentry drones barred their path. Douglas dove and rolled under a scything laser grid, Xyloth's hacking skills barely shutting it down in time. Grath bisected a lunging drone with a single mighty swing, sparks and hydraulic fluid spraying the walls. As they rounded a corner, a ping sounded from Xyloth's scanner. "We've got company," she hissed, multiple signatures closing fast. They clashed in the heart of the station, a cavernous chamber dominated by a towering alien machine. The Nausicaans poured from every entrance, energy spears crackling. Douglas and his team met them head-on, carbines and axe and hacking tools put to lethal work. In the chaos, Douglas spotted a familiar silhouette climbing the central machine. Fenris, his eyes fixed on a glowing console at its apex. The hiding place of the Codex. "Xyloth, Grath, hold them here," Douglas roared, already sprinting for the machine. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head as he leapt from handhold to handhold, Fenris always just ahead. They came together at the summit in a crash of blows. Fenris was all whipcord muscle and vicious cunning, his clawed gauntlets raking at Douglas's face. Douglas hammered him back with a headbutt, a roundhouse kick. "Why, Fenris? Why serve the Council's enemies?" The Nausicaan spat blood, grinning savagely. "You think I serve the Council or their enemies? You have no idea what you've stumbled into, human. My benefactors will reshape the galaxy in their image once they have the Codex." He lunged in again, teeth bared. They traded blows back and forth across the platform, the battle raging below, fading to a distant din. Douglas's muscles burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Fenris was too strong, too fast. The Nausicaan slammed Douglas against the console, clawed hands wrapping around his throat. Spots swam in Douglas's vision. He scrabbled weakly at Fenris's grip. Douglas dragged himself to his feet, clutching his bruised windpipe. He met Grath's eyes, the Carnathy's craggy face split by a weary smile. And then a flicker of movement. Fenris, not quite dead, surging up with the last of his strength. His claws sank into Grath's side even as the warrior brought his axe down again in a killing blow. "Grath!" Douglas shouted, catching the Carnathy as he slumped. Bright blood welled between the warrior's fingers where he clutched at his wound. "Go!" Grath growled. "Get the Codex, finish the mission." Douglas laid him down, meeting his eyes one last time. A warrior's death in service of the cause. It was all Grath would have wanted. He turned to the console, slamming his hand on the release controls. The Nexus Codex rose from its cradle, an ornate crystal lattice thrumming with inner light. Douglas snatched it up, already keying his comm. The Axari's voice crackled back, tight with strain. "Better hurry, Douglas. The Nexium crystals on this station are going critical. The whole place is about to blow." Douglas leapt from the platform, hitting the floor in a roll. He sprinted through the chamber, leaping fallen bodies and energy blasts. Xyloth fell in beside him, her face pale. The station bucked and heaved as they pounded up the boarding ramp, alarms shrieking. Douglas threw himself into the pilot seat, hands flying across the controls. The shuttle roared out of the hangar seconds before the station core detonated, the shockwave hurling them spinning into the void. They had won. The Codex was safe, the Nausicaans' plan thwarted, but the cost had been high, too high. Douglas thought of Alaric, of Grath, of the countless lives lost in this shadow war. His jaw tightened, a cold resolve settling into his bones. And he would have answers, no matter where the path led him or what waited in the shadows between the stars. As the shuttle touched down on the landing pad, Douglas felt a sense of relief wash over him. The Nexus Codex was secure in his hands, its crystalline surface pulsing with an otherworldly energy. He strode into the council chambers, ready to present his hard-won prize. But the moment he crossed the threshold, he knew something was wrong. The air crackled with tension, and the faces of the assembled council members were tight with fear and suspicion. "Commander Brown," a familiar voice called out. It was Zelor, one of the council's most respected members. "Thank you for retrieving the codex. Now, hand it over to me for safekeeping." Douglas hesitated, his instincts screaming a warning. "With all due respect, Councillor, I think it would be best if I deliver the codex directly to the council as a whole." Zelor's eyes narrowed. "I must insist, Commander. The codex is too powerful to be entrusted to any one individual." Suddenly the doors to the chamber slammed shut. Armed guards, their uniforms bearing the insignia of the Nausicaan Empire, poured into the room. "What is the meaning of this?" Douglas demanded, his hand dropping to his sidearm. Zelor smiled coldly. "Did you really think we would let you keep the codex for yourself? The Nausicaans are the rightful inheritors of its power, and I intend to ensure they claim their birthright." Chaos erupted. Council members scrambled for cover as the Nausicaan guards opened fire. Douglas dove behind a pillar, the codex clutched to his chest. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the walls and shattering delicate instruments. Xyloth appeared at Douglas's side, her eyes wide with fear and betrayal. "We have to get out of here," she hissed. "Zelor's betrayed us all." Douglas nodded grimly. He tapped a sequence into his wristcom, activating a hidden exit protocol. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow escape tunnel. The Axari hesitated for a moment, then sprinted for the tunnel. Douglas laid down a blistering barrage of covering fire, dropping Nausicaan guards with precise shots. A plasma bolt seared across his shoulder, the pain nearly causing him to drop the codex. Gritting his teeth, Douglas lunged for the tunnel entrance, Zelor's furious shouts echoing behind him. The escape tunnel led them to a hidden hangar bay, where a small nondescript shuttle awaited. Douglas and Xyloth strapped in, their hands shaking with adrenaline. As the shuttle blasted free of the council's headquarters, Douglas's mind raced. Zelor's betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. They needed allies, resources, a plan. A sudden ping from the comm console caught his attention. It was a message, heavily encrypted, bearing a familiar signature. With trembling fingers, Douglas opened the message. His brother's face, bruised and bloodied, appeared on the screen. "Doug," Marcus croaked, his voice weak. "If you're getting this, I don't have much time. The Nausicaans, they've taken me. A prison ship, somewhere in the outer reaches." Douglas's heart clenched. Marcus coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. The message cut out in a burst of static. Douglas slumped back in his seat, his mind reeling. But beneath the shock and the grief, a cold, hard resolve began to form. He would find Marcus. He would uncover the truth behind Fenris and his mysterious patron, and he would make them pay. Douglas turned to Xyloth, his jaw set. "Set a course for the outer reaches. We have work to do." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.